Hello, Richard here, and welcome to part 2 of fixing the saddle on the Chinese Mini Lathe. If you recall from part 1, if you've seen part 1, you'll know that we were looking into a problem where there were some issues with the cuts I was getting on the lathe. It was cutting not only on the way in on the infeed, it was also cutting on the way out. Long story short, loads of play in the whole sort of tool post assembly all the way down to the bed. So we started looking at whether we could do a fairly quick fix to fix some of the play and get rid of some of that. So anyway, you can watch that video if you want to see how we got to where we are now. And where we are now is basically going on to the next stage of fixing the saddle gibs and the way they fix onto the saddle. So if you remember at the end of the last video, I said that no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. So always away with these things. You sort of think, I know, I'll just do a quick, easy fix. We'll just do I won't spend any time. We'll just do a quick fix, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Yeah, right. So 2 weeks later, you're still like manufacturing new parts for it. So I wouldn't say things aren't exactly going to plan. The plan was never really that firm in the first place. Anyway, let's carry on from where we left off and let's see how far we get. I spent a bit of time measuring this thing up and sort of just thinking about how I'm going to go about doing the next stage, which was sorting out the mating faces for where the gibs go, the gibs being these bits, and they sit on there. And what I need to do when I resurface these and level these up is make sure the gibs are parallel. So I need to have the gibs so that they're sitting parallel with this plane here and not canted up like that or kicked in like this. So I got to measuring sort of various faces, and I got to sort of thinking about how I'm going to measure this and make sure I'm getting everything flat. And the more I measured it, the worse it got. I thought, looking at this, I thought this face is quite flat. This is flat within about 3/100ths of a mil, 3/100ths of a millimeter. So I thought, well, that's a candidate. So if you put that on the surface plate, you then find that these are fairly close to that. And you think, all right, well, maybe I've got a point there where I can basically use that as my datum on the surface plate, and I can indicate these surfaces, and then I could even flip them over and blue them up and sort of get an imprint to scrape them down. But it turns out that this face is not level with these anymore. Doing some measurement, this one's kicked up by about 3 thou over its length, so about 0.075 millimeters over that much distance. So 3 thou over about half an inch of angle up. The top of this surface here, which is not a bearing surface or not a load bearing surface, it's just a flat surface. This is pretty much parallel with the actual cross slide ways. So obviously this was machined around the same time as this, and that's fairly close. It's a little bit out, maybe a few thou, which we can clean up. And underneath, if we flip it the other way, these two surfaces here, they're pretty parallel with this as well. It's just that this way here and the V groove kicked like that. So I think what happened is, I think in the factory they would have taken this and possibly they'd have faced off that surface first. They'd have prepared this surface and then maybe cut the dovetail around that time. Then they would have flipped it over and probably skimmed over this, fly cut this bit. And then it probably went on to another machine where they cut this probably with like maybe they got a horizontal mill with a side and face cutter and a V groove cutter on a stack. And I reckon when they put it on the jig, they had a bit of swarf under one end, probably this end, and it kicked it up. It's only by about 0.3 of a degree. I measured it, so it's not much. But what it means is, if this is on the actual bedways, there's that 0.3 degrees out that this is kicked up that way, it throws this out by a millimeter. This is about 140 mil long. Overall, there's 1 millimeter of difference in height. This is actually kicked up by a millimeter over its entire length, which sounds like quite a lot to me. And what it means as well is I can't really flip this over onto the surface plate and make these parallel with the surface, because then it won't be parallel with the bed. And this basically is the truth or the bed itself. This, where these ways are, this is flat on the bed. So I've had to give it a bit of thought as to how I'm going to approach this, really. Do I just kind of live with it and put it back together as best I can? Or do I go down the rabbit hole? I sometimes wonder if in a previous life I was a ferret or something, because whenever there's a rabbit hole, yeah, I'll go down it and follow it to the bitter end. What I'm thinking of doing is this. I'm thinking that I'd be much happier if this surface was like scraped in nice and flat. It's pretty flat anyway, but if I scrape this in, that gives me a really good datum to work off. I can flip this the other way up, and these can then just be sort of got parallel with the undersurface. And also, if I know that that's all parallel, then I can just mark these up on the surface plate, and I can get an imprint of the blue, and I can scrape them flat. And then what I'll do is I'll drop this V groove down. It only needs to go down about 0.4 millimeters because it pivots on this point. So when it's on the bed there, because this is like 0.4 millimeters down, it's like a seesaw. So this end goes down and this end goes up and gives us 1 millimeter of play. So what I'll probably do is re-scrape this V groove and just scrape both faces and keep going until I've got it down a bit. I should see the blue on this bit should then creep towards this edge. And then once I've sort of got the blue over, say, half this distance, then I'll re-scrape this down to match, and we can kind of nudge it down. And I can get it on the bed of the lathe, and I can indicate this dead level this way, so that when I indicate along here, I don't get any run out. So that's the plan. As usual, longer than we thought. These things are never simple, are they? And I think half the thing's knowing when to stop with it. You can just keep going forever and ever tweaking these things, and you've got to sometimes decide when to call it a day. But I feel happier, I think, just doing a bit of extra work on this. Also, it means as well that I know that my cross slide on the lathe is going to be running level. It's not going to be running up or downhill. Not that really matters too much on a lathe. It's not going to affect too much doing that. But I'd be happier knowing that it's all dead flat, and we'd have a really solid basis. So that's the next job then, is to scrape this flat. When we've got this scraped flat, then that's the surface I can indicate off. We'll drop the V groove down a little bit by scraping that as well. And as we go, we can then test this on the bed and make sure that this is coming into level. And then when we're at level, then we can go from there. So that's the plan anyway. Now I've got this saddle on the bed, and I just want to show you the run out. If we run the indicator in this direction, then you can just see how far out of whack this is and how much we need to take off. So I apologize for the wobbly gauge and the sort of the rubbishy kind of stand. Hopefully it won't wave around too much for you. I'll hold it as still as I can. So you can see straight away there, we're kind of 0.3 of a mil. Oh, sorry, that was me just not holding the stand still. And again, sorry about that. Right, there we go. And we get to the end, and we're about 0.9 of a mil over the entire length. So you can see just how far out it is. I'll see if I can bring it back without shaking it too much. And there you can see the angle we've got to deal with. Now, if I run the other way, if I run across, hopefully you'll be able to see that it's not too bad if we run this way. So you can see that that's quite level, which is good news that it's level this way. If I hold the thing still, that is. Yeah, it's this dial gauge and stand cost £20 off eBay, and it shows a bit, doesn't it? So anyway, we try again. So yeah, there's quite a bit of lying from the gauge. So we get a smooth indication. Yeah, that's a bit more like it. That's a bit more truthful. I'm not just going with whatever looks best and ignoring all the errors. I've measured this with let me just put that over here a moment. I did actually indicate it as well with this setup, which is a bit more of a sort of traditional heavy duty setup, but a bit harder to show you on the video with this one. So it's quite level this way. It's really not very level that way. So right, let's get scraping. Now I spread a little thin coat of marking blue on the surface plate here, and just going to take this, turn it upside down, and see if we can get an imprint onto this face to see just how flat this is. So let's give that a go. Okay, so there you can see we've got a bit of an imprint on there, and there's a few high spots. I say I've indicated this before, and it's not very far out, so it's not going to take much sort of getting into shape. So what I'll probably do is just do a quick sort of pass one way and then the other with the scraper, just to get us a surface to look at, and then we'll go from there. Right, that's about 10 passes, I'd say. and you can see how quickly it's starting to come in. We got sort of blue over most of the surface, and I've put quite a thick coat on just to make it show up on the camera better. But it's not too much further to go, really. Just probably a few more passes, break up the surface area a little bit, put a lighter coat of blue on, and that'll be done. So don't take too long. It's probably about a quarter of an hour to get to that stage where it's already quite flat already. So yeah, crack on. Right, I'm going to call it done on the just flattening that surface now. You can see we've got a blue pattern over the whole surface. I'll put the blue on a little bit thick so you can kind of hopefully pick it up on the camera. So it's not a sliding way or anything, so I haven't got to worry about breaking the surface up too much. This just tells me that I've got it pretty much flat. So next thing to do now that I know that's flat is we can start to work on this V, and we can then reference the top surface to know when we're getting somewhere near level. Okay, well, I've been scraping this now for a couple of hours probably, just scraping the V, trying to lower that down a little bit. And slow start with that. Well, I got my eye in with the technique, really. It took me a little while just to sort of suss out how heavy I could go with it. So to begin with, I was sort of being very lightweight with it and just taking small cuts, and it was taking forever to get anywhere. So in the last sort of 25 minutes, I got more of a feel for how heavy I could go, and I managed to actually really start roughing some metal off it quite quickly. So it's going down quite fast now. And we'll get the indicator on it in a moment. I'll show you where we are. But I thought what we'll do to begin with is we'll just take an imprint off the bed. I've got some blue on there, so let's just put it on and we'll have a look at where we are. I've got quite a lot of blue on the bed to give us a good strong imprint, hopefully. Right, so like I said, you can see here, because we've taken meat out of the V, you can see on this end that the bluing has moved to this side. And that's because as we're lowering the V, this is basically rotating around. This edge here is rotating off the bed. So we're only getting contacts here. So that's what we expected. We've got a few points of contact on this bit I've been roughing. I'm not too worried about that. That still needs quite a bit taking off. And we've got reasonable contact all the way along this back face here. So I say what I'm tending to do now is to leave this back face as it is and then just take the meat off this one. Doesn't really matter which one I take it off. It's going to be the same end result, really. So that's the sort of the state of play at the moment. What we'll do, we'll get the indicator on and we'll indicate it, and I'll show you sort of how near or how far out we are now. Okay, so let's get that set up. I've got a bit of a better base on this now. I've got my surface gauge, which has got quite a wide surface area, sitting on the bed, and I've sort of concocted a setup here of various stands that hopefully will give us a bit more of a stable platform to indicate it off. Now, unfortunately, in doing this, the gauge is going to sort of go from this angle and it's going to swing round. So you're going to get a bit of parallax error on the reading from what you can see. But hopefully you get a rough idea of where we are anyway. So let's see if we can just get a bit of a indication of where we are now. Bear in mind, to begin with, we were 0.9 millimeters out over the entire length. So let's just sweep that along. And it's not easy sort of keeping it all in the right place. So bear with me, and hopefully you'll be able to see the dial at the end there. And we're looking at about 0.25 mil now, whereas before it was about 0.9. So we've got about a 1/4 of a millimetre to lower this by. So we need to rough a bit more material off. We need to pop that down there. So we need to take a little bit more off the V. We need to take some more out of there. This will probably thin up even more. And then when we're done, then I'm going to have to level this back up. What I want to do really is take the meat off the front. I don't want to take any off the back, otherwise I'm kind of just wasting effort really. But in taking this back down to level, then this is going to need to come down again. So I'm going to have to sort of to and fro a little bit as we kind of jiggle it backwards and forwards, getting it all nicely lined up. So more roughing on here, and then I'll bring you back in and see where we are. Okay, so some time has passed, and I've been working on the V and the flat underneath here, and I thought I'd bring you in and just show you where we are at the moment. So what I'll do, I'll just do a sweep with the gauge and show you what sort of discrepancy we've got now over the the slope of the cross slide. I've changed to a different dial indicator actually. I was using this one, which has got quite a long stroke, but the trouble with this is it kind of, where it's a long stroke gauge, but moving it sideways caused quite a lot of problems. It wasn't very repeatable, and I've got one with a shorter travel, and it should be a bit more stable for you. So what I'll do, I'll sweep it round, and there's a bit of parallax error because this is going to sort of sweep in this way again. So at the moment it's on 0, just about. Let me just recheck that. So that's on 0 for me, and what I'll do, I'll sweep it around, and you can see where we are at the moment. So try to keep this fairly steady for you as we come across. So now, if we take a look at that, that's 0.04 of a millimetre. So what, just under 2 thou, probably, compared with as it was when we started, where it was 0.9 of a millimetre, which was 36 thou. So it's almost there. I could almost call that done, to be honest. But I think we can probably nail it down to 0, get it smack on with a little more work. So what I'll do, I've got some blue on the bedways. So I'm just going to show you the imprint we're getting at the moment. Let me move this out of the way. So hopefully you can see this okay. So you can see on the flat now, we've got a full imprint all the way across here. And it thins out a little bit at this end, which I'm not too worried about because we have got coverage. It is touching. It's just a little more patchy. So that's fine. I could live with that. On the V's here, let's have a look. So this V, where I've been doing most of the roughing, we've got a little low spot in the middle, probably where I got a bit enthusiastic with the scraper. And there's a little bit missing here where there's a counter bore for this oil way. I think that was an oil way. Yes, that was an oil way. Where there's a counter bore for that, the scraper tended to follow it. So it's just gouged a little bit out there. But we've got contact on the other side, just here. So that's not a problem. And again, I could probably live with that. I mean, it's quite good coverage overall. Move it around a bit so hopefully you can get it in the light. And the other face, if you look down there, we've got good contact over most of that. There's a few little low spots at either end. Nothing to write home about, though. I mean, you're probably only talking a few tenths in difference in height anyway. So that's pretty good contact. So what I'm going to do is just take a little bit more of a skim off here, which means I can probably even the coverage up. This should drop us down by a little bit more and get a bit closer to having a dead flat surface. So more scraping. Right, well, that's had about 20 minutes of work done on it just to get this face a little lower, and then to sort of try and finesse it up a little bit, sort of break up the surface somewhat. Get that in the light for you. Hopefully you can see how it looks now. Move it around a little bit. I've got some blue on the bed, so we'll give it a rub and see where we are. So just carefully put that down. Just let it move under its own weight there. Blue's, again, it's probably a bit thick. I've just freshly put it on, so it might be a bit thick, but we'll have a look, see what we get. Okay, so yeah, like I say, it's probably a little bit too thick. If I can show you, get in on there. So we've got good coverage over here. So you can see there we've got continuous looking coverage, but I can see light and dark spots. So the blue's a bit thick, but like I said, it's just showing us we've got good contact. We've got a little bit missing there still. And the back face, I've got almost continuous coverage all the way along that one. Like I said, I'll put the blue a bit thinner, you'd see it sort of patch up a bit. So I'm pretty happy with that. And then on the back face, funnily enough, the coverage has shifted a little bit off this edge and has moved a little heavier here, but nothing really to write home about. I've got sort of a few little bits here, and I can see some sparkles in there as well. So sometimes, when you've got a high spot, you don't get any blue on it at all because it's very high. So I can see some shiny bits where it's been stoned. So yeah, I'm happy enough with that. I'm not going to sort of try and take this to insane levels. All I want is evenness. So let's get it back on the bed and see how it indicates. Okay, so I've got that zeroed and we'll sweep it along. Trying to keep it level. It's tricky because I'm not sure the bed's entirely flat, but we'll get it up to the other end and see where that ends up. And that's 0.5 of a millimeter, so almost spot on. So compared with what it was like, I would call that a success. Let's just indicate it side to side. So we're on just over 1/100 of a millimeter there. And maybe 0 there. So we got about 1/100 of a millimeter side to side at that point. Let's try it halfway down. Re-zero it. Want to just touch it off. Let me zero that round. So you have to stand on your head to watch this bit, I'm afraid. Okay, let's see what we're like there. So 0 there. And see the gauge moving around. I don't think the bed's particularly flat. I'd put pressure on the same spot each time. So we're about 0 there, and we're 0 there. See if we can get around the other way without it all falling apart. So let me look. I've got 0 there, and I've got about 1/100 of a millimeter there if I look around there. So that's pretty darn good, I would say. So I'm going to call that part of it done. And then all we got to do now is flip it over and sort these faces out. So now I know that this is all flat and level with this, parallel with this face, should I say. What I can do now is I can put this on the surface plate, and then I can basically take some measurements as to the height of these, get them scraped, leveled, and then we'll be on to making some new gib strips. The next job is going to be to level these two shoulders, I guess you'd call them, level these shoulders up so that they're parallel with the rest of the geometry and nice and flat. Now we got the geometry of the V slot and the flat here. We've got that now parallel with this surface. So now we can use this surface as a reference to get these two into truth. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to quickly rough scrape both of these to get rid of the machining marks. I don't know if you can see there, but there's a... You hear that when I bring it to the microphone? My nail rubbing over the machining marks. So we'll get those smoothed out, and then we can get it on the surface plate and take some measurements. Right, I'm sensing now that the tool's getting a little bit blunt, so I'm just going to take the carbide tip out of the scraping tool, get that over to the grinder, and we'll give that a little hone up. So these carbide tools are a bit of a pain to sharpen because you've got to use something that's harder than carbide. And pretty much the only thing that's harder than carbide is diamond. So to hone this up, I've got a diamond plate bolted onto one end of my bench grinder. And as you can see here, I've got this little tool rest. This is something I 3D printed and just bolted on there just to give me a 5-degree angle. So we need to cut a 5-degree negative rake on the tool. So that's what that does. That just gives me this angle. Now, where it's only plastic, it's not the strongest thing, but it's just a honing guide. So there's no pressure on it, and it's perfectly fine for this. You know, you don't want to do anything on here that's going to get hot or put a lot of force on it, but I'm literally just kissing the surface of that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to grind and put 4 grinds on here. So put a grind this way, then we'll flip it over and put a grind the other way, and we'll end up with, I don't know if you can see that, you end up with 2 cutting edges, basically, one this side and one the other side, and you'll get a line down the middle when you get it right. And that means we can flip the tool over and get 4 cutting edges off one tool. So I'll power the grinder up, stop talking, and we'll get this tool sharpened up a little bit. Okay, so that's just got rid of some of the machining marks. Now we'll get it on the surface plate and we'll see where we are. Okay, welcome to the surface plate, my humble surface plate. What I've got is a surface gauge with a dial gauge on it, and this one is goes to 1/2 thousandth or 5/10ths. So each small division is 5/10ths, 5/10,000ths of an inch, that is. Got the saddle on the surface plate, so I'm just going to hop onto the edge there, and what we want to do is get that zeroed as best we can. So it's a bit of an old gauge, and there's going to be a little bit of unrepeatability to it, I dare say. But we'll call that 0 right there. Hopefully you can see that without any glare on the dial. And then what we'll do is we're just going to move the part along, without it falling off. And we'll see what we get on the other end. And at the other end, we've got pretty much 0, minus a 1/10 or 2. There may be some fluctuations in the middle, but we're not too worried about that right now. And we'll flip it around, try the other end. And on this end, we're looking at sort of that's about plus 2.5 thousandths of an inch on there. And then we'll sweep it to the other end as best I can without falling off the edge. And we get to the other end, and we're about minus half a thousandth, or minus 5/10. Let's just bring it back round to the other side again. See if that's still reading 0. Yeah, that's pretty much 0. And this end, depending where we put it, pretty much 0. So what we're looking at, if we come back to this end here, so here we are pretty much plus 2.5, and then elsewhere we're all 0. So that's pretty good. So all we want to do really is just take this corner down, and until we get 0 all the way across, really, until we get it level. So we'll scrape this down until we can get them all level, and then we can flip it over and we can take an imprint with the blue to see sort of how far out we are this way or the other way. Again, the beauty is, because we've sort of referenced everything to the underneath face, i.e. everything's now referenced to this face, we can do that. We can put it on this face, and then these should be parallel with the surface plate. And if we pop it the other way up, doing it this way round, once those shoulders are in, this should then be parallel to the surface plate. Out of interest, if you look at our plus 2.5 thousandths end, we put the part down this way. You hear that? So we're getting a rock. It's higher across these two edges, so it's rocking that way, and we'll eliminate that. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to step scrape this. So that means basically I'm going to scrape all the way across, but in stages. So I'm going to scrape probably the first quarter, then the first half, then the first 3/4, and I'm going to leave that bit, and then we'll see where we are, and then we'll come back and we can keep doing that. So we're scraping this end more than this end. In fact, we're not scraping this end at all. So we'll just scrape here, and then here, and then here. So this gets 3 times the scraping that this does, and we'll see where that takes us. Now I've given this high parts here probably about 4 or 5 passes of scraping, which seems to have brought it down a bit. So let's have a look at where we are now. So if I bring this onto here, you can see we're at 0'd there, and we'll just move along. It's a little bit glitchy because the surface finish isn't very good. It's quite a roughly scraped finish. And we'll move up to the other end. And you can see now that we're kind of within a few tenths of 0 there. Compared with we were plus 2.5, 2.5 thou actually. So now we're just plus probably maybe 5/10 or so. I mean, it depends where you move. You can see that, you know, there's little hills and divots. So now we're, well, if I put it there, we're on 0. So that's taken that out. We'll just spin it around and have a quick look at the other side just to see, just as a sanity check. So that's giving us about 0 there. And we'll just swipe along. And there are a few little hills and valleys in this as well. But we're just looking to get it overall kind of roughly in the ballpark here. And then by the time we're at the other end, we're getting back towards 0 again, almost sort of minus 4/10, 4/10,000ths of an inch. Now I notice as well with this that the you move that out of the way. These are also not parallel this way as well. So if you if I put a ruler on here, I don't think I'm going to be able to show you on here, but if I put a ruler on and move it around, I can actually see daylights because, you know, this one, for example, is kicked up that way. Yeah, I exaggerate, but sort of thing. So really the thing to do now is going to be to get some blue on the surface plate. And then we can take an imprint and actually see just how flat these are. And then it's a case then of just getting these nice and sort of flat on the same plane. And then we can see how they are relative to the other plane, and we can sort of tweak and to and fro it from there. Okay, so we've got some blue on the surface plate, and a little handy tip for this that I've sort of sussed out is that if you pick up some blue on the roller, that is if you're using a roller and you're not using like a cloth or your fingers or something like that, you pick up a bit of blue on the roller, it'll usually form a little spot, and then as you roll, you just kind of end up with one spot. So what works quite well is when you're rolling, rather than just rolling and keeping it flat on the surface plates, every time you go, say, forward, at the end, just pick up and then at the end of the back pickup. So if you do that, it kind of spins the wheel and just helps spread it a bit more evenly. Sort of mention it because it saves me a lot of hassle doing it that way. So we've got some blue down, and let's take a look at the job. And we need to just get an idea, take an imprint of these two surfaces here. So let's do that. Get it down on the surface plate. Give it a bit of a move around. Okay, so there you can see the sort of first impression. We've got contact at this end and this end, but it's only on this side here. So that's sort of suggesting that this is actually sloping down that way slightly. We've got more even coverage on this side, so this is probably flatter, and there's a few little high spots here and there. So next thing to do is get the scraper out and take off the high spots and see if we can improve the coverage. So I'll do that, and then I'll come back when I've got something to show you. Well, this has now had about 8 or 9 passes, fairly light passes. I'm not really hogging metal off it because it's not very uneven. But you can see now the blue pattern is starting to shift a bit. We've got fairly even coverage over this side. There's a few little patches, but I'm still sort of just taking that down quite flatly at the moment. Then on this side, you can see that there's a little kind of hollow, just showing here where my thumb is. There's not much blue there, so the blue sort of goes around the outside, showing there's a little hollow, and that was that sort of slope we were seeing when we did the initial imprints, and also when we were indicating it. You could see that it was sort of get to the right place. Sort of, it was angled up a bit like that, if I exaggerate. So I'll just carry on scraping this down until this hollow disappears and we get even coverage. And then what we'll do is we'll see how level we are relative to this face, because obviously it might have gone a little bit out of whack. But we just repeat the process, easing it in as we go. So if we scrape this all flat and level, then that's going to improve the accuracy of everything. Then when we check it again, if it's a little bit out, we've got less work to do. And eventually we'll get to a point where we're happy that everything's good enough. And that's all we're aiming for, is for this to be good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be good enough. All right, more scraping. This is the state of play after about another 4 or 5 passes, fairly heavy, well, medium strokes. I'm not, as I say, I'm not really roughing this, but I'm leaning into it a little bit to speed things up a bit. But you can see now that we've got rid of the dip on one side. In fact, I can't even remember which side it was on. Which is probably a good thing. But we've got fairly even coverage now over both surfaces. There's a few little sort of low spots here and there, but I'm really happy with the way that's leveled up now. I think what I'm going to do is clean things up a little bit, and we'll get it back on the surface plate, and we'll run the indicator over it and see sort of roughly where it is, because if I need to make some adjustments, now is probably the time. We've got it on the surface plate again, and I'm just trying to get this gauge zeroed in as best I can. The gauge isn't very repeatable. It's got a bit of backlash. It's quite an old gauge, quite an old dial gauge. So all we're looking for really is a bit of sort of a relative measurement. So if we call that edge there, say +2/10, this is it's a 1/2 thousandths gauge. The dots in between the lines are 5/10,000ths of an inch. And I'm working in imperial here, just because that's what my gauge is. I work in both. I mean, I primarily work in metric. I was born in the metric age. I did my machine shop training fully in metric. But I quite like to flip between the two. I feel quite at home with both. In some ways, I actually prefer imperial for this kind of work. Units are more manageable in some ways. You know, you're talking decimals anyway, whether it's inches or millimeters. So that's why we're talking in sort of old money at the moment. There we've got about 2/10. And when I say tenths, that's sort of 10,000ths of an inch. We check the other side, and we're about -1. So +2, -1. So 3/10,000ths over that edge. On this edge, we're about +2,000ths. And then we'll just try the other edge. And about +4. So if I can remember all those measurements, that's about probably 1/2 thou difference over the whole area. All in all, that's pretty good. It's pretty parallel with the surface plate, which means it's pretty parallel with this surface here. And we now know that all this geometry here, this is all good relative to this surface here. So everything's starting to sort of come in together now. So what I need to do now is get some blue back on. We'll take an impression of what we've got, get some blue on there, and start finessing it down and actually just improving the surface finish on that now. All right, I'll see you back here in a bit. Right, I'm going to call that done exactly where it is. So if we have a look, hopefully you can see that on the camera if I move it around a little bit. You can see we got a coverage pattern over the whole surface area. There's a few little tiny low spots, but they wouldn't be very low at all. You know, they're going to be very close. I've gone for a fairly sort of flat finish. I didn't want to break this up into lots of dots because it's not a sliding fit. This part doesn't slide on anything here. This just has the gibs clamped onto it. So it wants to be as flat as possible. There's no benefit in this having lots of contact points because that's not really what it's about on this particular part. So yeah, we've got fairly uniform coverage. There's a few little sort of bits on the edges where maybe the scraper rolled off the edge slightly. Again, that doesn't really matter. And I don't know how well you can see, but there is coverage right to both ends on that. Move it around a little bit in the light. So it's a reasonably thin coat of blue. Well, thin for me anyway. I know some people don't even use blue. When they get to the final stage, they just wipe the surface plate with alcohol and just use alcohol and the shininess of the high spots to see where they're at. But this is good enough for government work, good enough for home engineering. And at the end of the day, that's the name of the channel. The channel is Engineering at Home. So, you know, we're doing this at home. We're doing it on a budget, and we don't have to be perfect. We're not precision engineers here. We're just trying to make our tools better than they were when we got them. So I'm going to call that done. I'm going to call this part done. This has now been sort of corrected well enough that it's useful. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new pair of these because these are, I'm presuming these are just steel. I might do a grinder spark test, see if they're anything other than steel, but given that, given the state of them, I think they're just plain old steel. So what I want to do is make some new ones of these, but I want to make them out of cast iron. And we'll talk about that next. Right, so the saddle is now sorted pretty much. Everything's leveled up. We've got this top surface is scraped and flat, and that is parallel with the geometry here for the flat and the V-groove. So we know that these are now parallel with this surface here. And also I've scraped in these surfaces where these flats where the gibs are going to go. So I know that they're all square. So everything's pretty much square to itself. And it's within probably half a thou, about 1/100 of a millimeter. So that's good enough for what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to perfect this. I'm just trying to get it to work nicely. So the next thing I need to do is make some new ones of these. These are the original saddle gibs, and they're horrible. So I'm going to make some new ones of these, and these I think are steel, as I said. So I'm going to make some of these out of cast iron. Now here in England, it's actually quite hard to get hold of cast iron, which is a bit ironic seeing as most of the planet is made of iron. You know, we live on a kind of iron-based planet, really. But it's very hard to get hold of. I mean, you can buy it. You can buy cast iron rods. You can buy cast iron bar. The only thing is, it's usually like sort of 2 inches square, 50 millimeters square, which is way too much for something like this. So I've had a real job actually being able to buy cast iron flat bar like this that's suitable for sort of making machine parts out of. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make some new gibs out of this. This is the base plate of an old bench drill that's no longer with us. It's gone to the great workshop in the sky. And I think to sort of give it a good honourable send-off, we're going to recycle this into some new gib strips. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this up. I reckon I can, from the sides, I reckon I can cut some new gib strips, and I can make them the same sort of size, but actually a bit thicker as well. So these, I believe, are 6 millimeters thick, 1/4 inch thick. So I'm going to up that to near 1/2 inch or 11 millimeters thick out of this. And that way then I can hand cut them, because I don't have a milling machine. I've got, you know, this is my machine tools here, my mini lathe. I'm sort of rebuilding my workshop up from nothing. I mean, I've got plenty of tools, but I don't have any machine tools at the moment. So I don't have a milling machine. I don't have a power hacksaw or anything like that. So a lot of what I'm going to be doing will be done by hand. So with this, I'm probably going to just get the hacksaw out and a packet of spare blades and plenty of fresh hot tea. And I'm going to manually cut some bits off this. And because it's cast iron, I can then scrape them flat. So if it was steel, it'd be harder to scrape. You can scrape steel, but it's not very pleasant, really. I don't really fancy it. I do have a 4-jaw chuck for the lathe, so I may well use the 4-jaw chuck to square up some parts, but that means kind of rebuilding the lathe again. So we'll see. Anyway, that's the plan. I'm going to cut this up, by hand, using hand tools, using freely available, sort of things you've got in your home workshop. After all, the channel is engineering at home, so the whole point really is to be doing things with basic tools and by hand, using some of the old skills. So we'll make some new gibs out of this, and that'll be part 3, so stay tuned for that.